Give me just a second. Um, I guess, does it matter if I have headphones on?
Doesn't matter to me. Whatever works for you.
Cool. I normally bring like wireless mics with me everywhere, but for whatever reason, this trip, I didn't think I was going to need it. Even though we had said we were going to do this podcast, I totally just spaced it. So give
Yeah,
me a
no
second.
worries.
Better lighting here. Um,
You're in the UK?
yeah, I just got here. I had a pretty long like layover delay and ended up in Germany overnight and then ended up getting here like this morning, maybe 10 o'clock. And so just
Damn. What time is it there? Oh.
hmm,
How's your Wi-Fi?
it's fine. I mean, I've got decent Wi-Fi.
It says mine is unstable. Weird.
I don't think I would have a better with my phone. So yeah, hopefully this will work.
Yeah, this should be fine. So
Cool.
are you there for the Olympics, I assume, or
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to transpire, but it'll be some kind of a commentary, but it's like a technically called a watch party. So it's like
hmm.
Sam and I and then Nick will be on screen talking about what's happening, but we can't show it. We can't, I don't think
Hmm.
we can do like a play by play. So it'll be just more of a general kind of us bullshitting about weightlifting. And then there'll be like a pretty sure like a pre-show and a post-show that'll end up on YouTube. So it'll be kind of the full thing.
Gotcha. That's yeah, so there's quite a few questions I want to ask you, but
Yeah.
that I think that starts off with a good point, which is like how did you get into like working with Seb and like doing the weightlifting house thing and like all you guys are doing with that?
Yeah, so I reached out to Seb 2021, late 2021, 2022. And we had built this, or we were in the process of building this app, this weightlifting AI app, and I needed to find someone who would be like a good partner to distribute it, to sort of be able to kind of get the the word out, I guess is the way to say it, but like to sort of promote it. Because I just didn't have the bandwidth. I wouldn't have been able to do it myself. So I ended up with that. And then basically like the week we went out there to visit them, they got a call from David Kipchidze, who basically was like, "Hey, do you guys want to do this commentary for the European Championships 2022?"
Hmm.
And I was kind of just in the right place at the right time, and so I ended up, jumping in with him. And that first one we did was pretty bad, but it was a lot of fun. It was a cool like experience, to go and like talk about weightlifting for a couple hours while you're watching it.
Yeah, I mean I think you guys do a great job,
Thanks.
at least from the ones I've seen. So yeah. So the all right, so the AI was like that was kind of like your baby, and then you collaborated with Seb with like the whole weightlifting house thing to kind of promote it.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
It's been something I wanted to do for a long time. One of the things I think is a big problem or like sort of a big area that's missing in weightlifting training and probably in a lot of training is that there's not really any kind of innovation on the side of like using some of these more powerful software tools or solutions to like learn about training or, you know, augment the process of writing programming or, distilling down insights as to what people are doing. You have a lot of research that's existed. You have a lot of sports science that goes on, but so much of that is not necessarily immediately applicable. And what I wanted to do was kind of build something that allowed people to develop individualized programs, gain some kind of insight into their training, and then from there, we could expand on it. The original app that we made was a pretty good version of that, but the new app that we're building is significantly better, and the coaching platform we're building is significantly better. So we have the ability to now draw on a bunch of these cool, like super powerful AI models, do
Mhm.
really cool stuff with it, and then hopefully hand coaches a lot more insights about the programming and training and what their athletes are doing so that, you can end up making a lot of really good small choices versus hoping you made one really good big choice.
Hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. That's like what I tell a lot of people is like the science, the sports science side of things, like that generally answers like the why of
Mhm.
training, right? Like why we do what we do. But a lot of like program like design and stuff comes from like experience, right? Like you've had experience working with other coaches or athletes, you've seen kind of what works, what doesn't work. And so you kind of design your program around that. And then the sports science stuff kind of tells us, oh, like this is why this principle works, right? And this is why these things are effective and these things maybe aren't so much so. So it's cool
Yeah.
that you guys are like collecting like data and like you know really fine tuning that process and everything.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is that I don't think there's not going to be any amazing insights to learn. We know training, we kind of know how this works, right? I mean, there's been plenty of Olympic champions. We can look at what they've done. But to me, the thing that I believe is kind of lost is the ability to understand and manage like day to day, week to week training.
Yeah.
Eric Helms talks about this idea like sports science won't tell you what to do next Tuesday. Um, and and that's kind of the goal is that we want to build a coaching platform that allows you to kind of gain some insight as to like what should I do next Tuesday based on what we've
Mhm.
done, based on how I respond, based on whatever demographic data and whatever big data we have, what is the most likely best option for,
Mhm.
tomorrow's training. Because it's like ultimately training is pretty straightforward. You're just
Mhm.
managing each individual's response to that training. Some people are whatever that, they can clean from the floor twice a week, but other people can only clean from the floor once a week. And some people, have the ability to snatch 5 times a week and some don't. And so those are subtle differences, but you have to sort of tease them out as you learn, as you gain experience. You need to have, in my opinion, to manage a lot of athletes and coach a lot of people, you need to have some kind of way of collecting data and using that to inform you. If you don't do that, you're basically just putting out a template or putting out a particular flavor of program, and you're going to bias to the athletes that do well with that. And
Mhm.
then like the Bulgarian system where it's like
Mhm.
it selects for the type of person who's going to succeed there. Um, so yeah.
That's awesome. So it's like it's the ultimate like auto-regulated approach, right? Where it's like taking the feedback and using that to like to adjust the system.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the goal of every training, every coach is to like make a lot of really good choices, right? And try to like
Mhm.
prevent your athlete from doing anything really dumb. And that's like what better way to do that than to use actual data to inform yourself?
Yeah, that's awesome. And how's it working out? Like how's the feedback so far?
Yeah, the original AI app is only programming, and so it's delivered programming to athletes, who don't have a coach. Or some maybe do, but it's mostly like just the training programs. So they're individualized pretty well. The new coaching platform we have is way, way more powerful. We have just way more depth to what we're doing, so
Mhm.
we actually can look at a lot of different things and extract way more insights from that data because we're collecting significantly more data. Um, and coaches are going to need that. Coaches are going to need this ability to look into, all kinds of things and have, a clear picture of like what they would do with their athlete in any one scenario. So yeah,
Mhm.
we're
What are
excited
what,
for it.
what are the kind of things that you're collecting? Are you collecting like I'm assuming like daily readiness stuff, like soreness and like readiness to train and
So interesting to me is that it doesn't appear that a lot of like readiness questionnaires are really that. The data on readiness questionnaires seems to be a bit underwhelming, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not great. We also want to try to get our goal is always to try to be as first principles as possible. So we want to be in a place where if we're collecting some kind of information, it has to be as objective as it can be. And so, we want to collect one, for example, like what did the coach prescribe as a training program versus what did the actually athlete actually do that day? with every set and rep and everything. And then looking at like the delta between those, what's the deviation from the training plan versus what they do? We want to do things that are, like I said, more objective so we can collect information on sets, reps, intensities, anything that was basically done as far as training, and then compare that to, like the big data collection of like what are other athletes that are in the same demographic data, what are they doing? So
Mm-hmm.
men from, 18 to 22 that are this tall and this weight and this strength levels, how similar is the training they're doing to each other? One of the bigger benefits we have too is that with a coaching platform, with our product being a coaching platform, we can kind of extract what successful coaches and athletes are doing and use that
Mm-hmm.
to form ourselves of what works. So you're going to see in every sport sort of, it's not a regression to the mean, but you're going to see a sort of like consolidation and refinement of the process. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people in weightlifting do a lot of snatch and clean and jerk and squat and pull. They don't
Mm-hmm.
do, curls and whatever 100-meter sprints. And that's for a reason. But more than that, there's a lot of intricacy in that because not everybody does every single program the same. But we want to learn, what are the things that successful athletes are doing, and are there details we can tease out of that with that data. So collecting large scale data from lots of coaches that are successful and coaches that are, unsuccessful with athletes, then looking at each individual and saying, how does your demographic data compare to these people that are successful versus what are their coaches having them do? And then on the individual level as well, what are you getting done in the training program? What does the training program look like? What days are you having more success or less success? Where are there problems as far as different intensity ranges or whatever. And that's all
Mm-hmm.
just from the perspective of collecting training data. The software and the solution that we're building will use computer vision as well. And so we're going to try to collect as much data as we can as far as like, you know, what exercises have an impact on a particular error. So if you jump forward, we can label videos as this guy jumped forward and look at what exercises they did in the program, and did jumping forward did that error become less significant over time, or did it have any
Mm-hmm.
impact on it? So if you do like a bunch of no hook, no feet snatches, like does it actually help you and prevent you from
Mm-hmm.
going forward, or is it just a sort of, placebo effect in the time, or only when you're doing that movement?
So in a way, it sounds like you have to like operationalize or quantify like different like the technique, right? Which
Mhm.
that's something like I've tried to play around with as a coach is like how do I operationalize like all right, these are the faults and these are the things that are happening in the technique and how do we quantify progress with that, right? And
Mhm.
how do we relate that to like the program? So how do you like it sounds like you kind of just you go through and you label like this fault is occurring, this is what we did it fix like the fault?
Yeah, so in the process of doing this, I've learned a lot about how I think as far as a coach, but also how my thinking is flawed. And when I started out as a coach a long time ago, I think a lot of coaches follow this progression, which is you learn about weightlifting, you fall in love with it, then you start getting excited about different things, and maybe you try a bunch of different exercises. And so your whole perspective on training is sort of built around like this very simple logic, which is I have this problem, I do this exercise, that problem goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's not necessarily true. That's not really how things work. If that was, we would have so many exceptional technicians and everyone would be super strong, right? So there's this element of like understanding things on a very, very small scale. So the way we look at how we would like select an exercise is the logic we use has to be similar to how a coach does it. If you see somebody performing something, let's say they're doing a snatch and they have an error, right? They have too much extension, they overextend their back and they get behind the bar.
Mm-hmm.
You have to break that down to like, what is the actual thing that is incorrect here? What are the most base elements we can break this down into? And then we have to look at what exercises or what movements or what training would have an impact on those. So if you have this overextension problem, you need to say, okay, we need to find movements that don't bias heavily towards overextension, one. So get rid of things that potentially exaggerate it. And then two, we have to look at things that, maybe augment the opposite side of this problem. So it might be that if you have an excessive hip extension at the top of the pull and too much lumbar extension, we would emphasize exercises that maybe, have a stronger bias towards, knee extension, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than things that, maybe would have a negative impact on this lower back extension. So it could be a bunch of different things, but you basically look at it as like, what are the most base, tiniest pieces we can break something into, which is how a coach does things. And then everything is probabilistic. It's not to say
Mm-hmm.
that I have this problem, this exercise fixes it. You say, I'm doing this. This problem is a combination of 5 or 6 different little things happening. How do I find a movement or a series of movements that bias heavily towards the things that will improve those 5 or 6 little things?
Mm-hmm.
And then you create a pool of exercises. And a coach would do this and say, you're overextending. So let's do a bunch of pulls where you stay over the bar, or some snatch deadlift where you stay over the bar, or, high pulls or whatever it is. That would, sort of get at all of these different elements versus just saying, oh, you overextend. This is the exercise you do. You do this, X,
Mm-hmm.
Y snatch. And so that whole process for me has been this thing of looking at, like, you know, how do I think as a coach? How do I program as a coach? What am I doing as far as, you know, selection of exercises? And you start to learn that a lot of this is just probabilistic thinking. You're going into a problem, you have an issue, a technical issue, and you have to make the best, sort of most highly educated guesses you can, and
Mm-hmm.
then try it and then see what the output is, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a process that every coach does naturally, very simply, and it's like not even it's not even anything special. You look at someone, be like, I think this exercise would fix that. You try it. If it does, great. If it doesn't, you try something else.
Mm-hmm.
Creating software that does this is a lot harder. And so it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to build, that's where AI becomes a very valuable tool for us, because we can use it it does very well with optimization. Machine learning is
Mm-hmm.
great for optimization. So we can say, hey, we're trying to optimize for these 5 characteristics being different than they are now. And you can feed this whole system into, say a transformer or something, and it can learn all the data, learns how it interacts with itself, and then it can create, lists of exercises that are better or worse than you'd expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, the goal of this is to sort of get to the point where every coach would have essentially a level playing field from a perspective of knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would have exceptional access to data that's collected from thousands of athletes, thousands of coaches, and then use that data to make really good choices. It doesn't mean that it's like we have the right answers,
Right.
but we just have lots of less wrong answers. That's our goal.
Yeah, we're all trying to be a little less wrong, right?
Right.
Yeah. And it's the technique is like a moving target too, right? It's not like, oh, you've got this issue, you fix this issue, you move on to the next one, right? Like it's constantly changing and moving. So
Yeah.
when you talk about like collecting data, are you getting you're getting information from like other coaches and stuff, or like what does that look like?
Well, so the coaching platform is designed in a way for us to basically aggregate and collect, you know, every data point we possibly can. So we have, the training programs of athletes. We have coaches on there, sending athletes their workouts and those athletes doing them. And then what we have is, basically this like massive data collection machine. We also have video input, so people would upload videos and we'll capture that data. At some point, we'd have enough video data to start, we can continue to label these videos and, put them into AI models and learn from what's going on there. But the whole thing is just a giant data collection machine, right? We just
Mhm.
want to collect as much as we can. Currently, everything is based around the training program, video, and then the final piece is like the actual written feedback that a coach gives.
Mm,
So we have like you upload a video to our platform and you know your coach writes a comment, hey, you jumped forward on this. We now have a training pair. So we have like a video that we know definitively you jump forward in. And so that gives us the ability to train our AI models to learn what jumping forward looks like.
mm,
But then additionally, as coaches give feedback on those videos, we learn what is the right thing to say to help improve someone jumping forward. So you
mm,
can develop these better strategies for, okay, we find that, this person was saying the word jump forward for, 6 months, and then
mm,
these other exercises, this is like a big stretch here, but theoretically the idea would be that we could, learn from what are the coaches saying and doing that's actually helping people, and
mm.
then that stuff to inform coaches that are not as experienced.
Interesting. But also like with that, with like the cues, I mean, I've experienced this, like you can tell someone, you've got like a range of cues for like any given issue, right? And like one thing can work super well for someone, it can absolutely not work for someone else, right? And so you've got to have this kind of range or like different ways of like conveying the same message to like different people, right? So is
Yeah.
that like accounted for or?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is going to be, these are questions we have to answer. We don't know how valuable this is.
Mm,
From that perspective, we don't know how valuable it is to have data, training data on cues and whatnot. Like you said, it's so much of it's resonating with a person. I mean, coaching is fundamentally just a communication problem. If
mm,
you can communicate well to somebody, you can get them to perform and do the thing you want.
mm,
If you communicate well with somebody, you can inspire them to perform a little better. I've had plenty of athletes that were physically capable of something and didn't perform until they were motivated, you know?
mm,
Like, well, what's the difference there? Well, somebody just said the right thing or you were in the right environment, so then you like tried harder.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is I see this as this project for me has been this idea of let's collect as much as we can and separate the wheat from the chaff. Like what's garbage that we just don't care about that isn't going to do anything for us
mm,
versus what is like useful data that we can actually draw insights from and deliver back to coaches.
mm. That's super cool. I think it's really awesome that you guys are taking this like data driven approach and using that to help like inform us as coaches. So what would you say then for someone like Carlos Nassar, right? Who's like very clearly kind of defies like what we teach in terms of like technique and is at like such a high level.
So the first question I would ask, I think that my philosophy on thinking, if I can say that, is the first question you have to ask yourself is, am I correct in my assumption? Because the first thing we state is Carlos Nassar does things wrong, and then we assume that that's the ground truth for everything that comes after. But the actual question we should ask ourselves is, whatever Carlos Nassar is doing works.
Hmm.
Is there a larger expanse of tolerances for good lifting,
Mm,
right? Or why does that work for him? And so, we can look at it and say, objectively, we know from some biomechanical analyses that like if he didn't do some of the things he does, he might lift more weight.
hmm.
But it's not necessarily as cut and dry as that because it's like, he's not the strongest lifter. Nino Pizzolatto is
Hmm.
significantly stronger, I'm guessing. Much less, in my opinion, Nino's technique is much less efficient, whereas Carlos is significantly more efficient.
Hmm.
There's good biomechanical data, and Kunanen, we talked to him a little bit ago, and he gave us some pretty interesting insights. But he said that as time has gone on since the late 90s or early 90s, we see a trend in you could call it like the double knee bend being
Hmm.
more extreme, as in the initial first extension of the knee is to a greater degree, so closer to 180 degrees. Then
Mm-hmm.
the rebending of the knees, that flexion of the knee again is more significant. And then the second, knee extension is more significant. So like the delta between the first extension of the knee, the rebend, and then the second extension of the knee is greater than it used to be. And that's indicative, this is true at the highest levels. And so you look at like Nino versus Carlos, Carlos's technique reflects that observation.
Mm-hmm.
He gets his knees back really, really well, drives his knees back under the bar really, really well, and then gets a great extension as well. He happens to, above the waist, do some funny things, right? He throws his shoulders way back, gets behind the bar.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at that lower body, the movements in his lower body compared to Nino, whose legs get basically straight, the bar is 3 or 4 inches out in front of him, and then he just kind of quickly shoves the knees back under and makes
Mm-hmm.
contact. Um, it's kind of funny because you're like, oh, this is interesting. Like there's a definitive like he is replicating a lot of what we see as far as the trend goes. There's definitely something not as efficient as it could be about Carlos's lifting, but
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting thing to sit there and say, well, before I assume I'm right, let me ask a different question, which is why does this exist the way it does? Like, why is he successful? Why is this happening when it seems to contradict what, traditional thinking would have? And
Mm-hmm.
that question might be very simple, right? It might be steroids. Um, it could be, right? It's like
Could be, yeah.
there's possibility.
Yeah.
So it's like that's where this whole process for me is about before I make the assumption that I'm right, I have to ask myself, how am I wrong about my thinking? And if I can figure out that there's something wrong about my thinking, then I don't even waste my time going down this road of believing that, how do I fit this into the boxes I have in my mind?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah, that's I as a coach, I try to never assume that I'm right, right? Like you said, I just always try to be like a little bit less wrong, and I'm always open to like different styles and opinions and, data depending on like what other athletes are doing. Another interesting example is Ramat's clean, right? Like Ramat's clean is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen. He's got
Yeah.
like I'm pretty sure like he changes directions at some
Yeah.
point, right? Like he literally like comes to a stop under the bar and then like re-accelerates as he comes up, and he's one of the best cleaners in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing because it's like, again, we would look at it and be like, it's not a traditional looking, the mechanics of his lift are not traditional. They don't look like what we used to see in the Soviet era or the sort of like typical Eastern Bloc style of lifting. And it doesn't even really look that much like like a Chinese style of lifting, right? Um, but here he is doing these huge weights. And again, the question becomes how, right?
Hmm.
Why is he able to do this? Is it, drugs? Is it that he's just has an innate ability to, not notice that the bar is decelerating as it passes his knee and he can just get into that power position and just deliver? There's a bunch of questions you have to ask yourself. And then there's this other sort of like, as a coach, and when you've done this I've been doing this for 20 years, you kind of have to have this bit of like faith almost, where it's like, I've seen so many things that I just can't explain.
Hmm.
And I mean, I've seen people do things that are just wild, just outrageous. And you're like, I have no idea how that happened. I don't understand, that guy's muscles are just made out of something else. And so for me, it's always having that little bit of like, I won't say skepticism, but that little bit of like, yeah, maybe there's some magic out there that like we
Hmm.
just don't know how to answer. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, shit, Rotmot's clean is just, it's, it's bizarre, but it's like, holy shit, it works.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, it's a funny thing.
Yeah. You guys were there at the World Cup, right?
Yeah.
For
Oh,
that 73 session. What was the deal with him like taking 30 seconds between the second and third?
I did a whole podcast with Josh Gibson about this, but the way I would describe it is this is a a hard question to answer, but I think it's an interesting story, right? It's so much more than just that moment, because that moment itself, that lift and that competition is the culmination of the whole quad leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you had Rotmot who, I mean, both of those guys came into that meet in completely polar opposite, like from total opposite ends. Rizky hadn't trained, like he had
Mm-hmm.
been barely training.
Mm-hmm.
Rob had been doing B session and C sessions and world records and B sessions
Mm-hmm.
and all this stuff. And if you were to take it, you know, you could look at this from 100 perspectives, but if you were to take this from one perspective, you could say Rotmot didn't train himself to compete against anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So he showed up and made a lot of amateur mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
He sat on the stairs for 30 seconds for no reason. He could have gone in the back. He could have done any number of things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was dumb. Um, he took it for granted that he was going to
Mm-hmm.
win. Um, he didn't expect Rizky to outperform him in the snatch like he did, and so he was behind, and maybe he's never really felt like he was behind. Um, so there's a lot of those possible scenarios. The the sort of question you ask yourself is why were so many, I mean, objectively, from a coaching, wearing a coaching hat, if I was to look at the quad that Rockmont put up, I would say you made like why did you do these things you did? Why are you in B sessions and C sessions? There's no reason for it. It's just pure ego at that point. Because like you're an A session lifter. You're supposed to be there. Like
Mm-hmm.
why are you in these other sessions? Why are you breaking records from them? One of the meets, I can't remember which one it was, had he I think he only took 5 lifts. Had he taken one more, he would have had a bigger total than what Rizky did in Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of those things where it's like, man, you made like just many, many terrible choices, bad choices, you know, that in the moment may not seem like bad choices. Like, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
know, whatever, 5 here, do this. This is more philosophical from a coaching perspective. And I don't know how you are, but I learned early on that winning is sometimes a matter of just being the person who dots all the I's and crosses all the T's and do everything you possibly can to inch your way up. You could take a
Mm-hmm.
lift who maybe isn't as physically talented or mentally talented as someone else, but if you do everything really well and you make all your lifts, you could beat a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a philosophy that I think you have to embody as a coach if you want to be successful in the long term with athletes. You look at the Georgian team, Asanidze is that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Detail oriented. He doesn't make silly choices. They don't do anything. There's no antics. It's every single thing is like, hey, we have a, you know, every gram is important to us, so we don't waste anything. There's no kind of bullshit going on. They don't, you know, Lasha doesn't go into B sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like, I think you look at it and it's almost like I've never coached anyone at his level, so I can't sit here and say that I know the right answers.
Mm-hmm.
But you can look at it and be like, man, there's a lot of choices you made that just really don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And to sit there at the end and rack that third clean and watch him stand up,
Mm-hmm.
he stood up, and I said this before a few times, every single person in that building knew he was going to miss that jerk.
Mm-hmm.
He knew it. And he stood there and you could see it in his face, in his eyes, that he knew as long as he didn't try it, he wasn't out. And
Right.
and you know, when you're there and doing the commentary, it feels like 10 minutes. He's just
Mm-hmm.
been, you know, it's probably 5 seconds or something. But it was like everyone knew he was going to miss the jerk.
Yep.
Because the clean was brutal. And you're
Mm-hmm.
just sitting there like, man, that's it. He just squandered it. He did it for like, took that 30-second rest and fucked the clean up, and that was it. Like, had he taken a minute, maybe that clean would have been better and he made the jerk.
Yeah.
But you think about it, it's like that's just the culmination of many, many sloppy attempts and sloppy decision making and just like all this stuff that adds up to like just one missed lift. I mean, he missed one lift. It just happened to be the most important lift of his life.
Yep.
Uh, so yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say exactly there, but to me, it's way deeper than just, he took too little rest.
Mm. Mm.
The reason he took too little rest to me is that everything he did leading up to that just solidified that that was an okay choice to make.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a hubris type thing.
Yeah, I mean, it might be hubris. It might just be that like Seb talks about like he thinks that Rahmat believed there was no other way that he was going to be in the Olympics. And so
Mm.
his belief was so strong that it was going to happen that he just, well, if it's going to happen, I'm just going to go do it right now.
Hmm.
You know? Which could be true too. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, if he would have made it, then we all would have been like, well,
Yeah, we wouldn't be having these conversations, but
yeah.
yeah, it's
So
interesting, right?
yeah, it's really sad to see like the Olympics and like the qualification with the way it works these days, and like some of the best lifters aren't going. Um, and it just,
Yeah,
yeah, it sucks to see.
yeah, it's rough because you have the sport's in a weird spot right now. I don't know if you want me to talk about this for a long time, but like the sport's in a weird spot because you have way too many weight classes. So you
Mm,
spread the talent out way too thin. And then you have so few at the Olympics that you end up with this weird like what are half of the people here doing? Maybe
mm,
more than like, there's just so few people that are going to qualify as individuals, and that's just the way it is now. That like it's almost like it feels like it's just why would anyone want to be a weightlifter? Like
hmm,
the only reason is that the IOC sends money to these countries to have a program, so it's your job. But like your chance of going to the Olympics as I mean, as almost anyone are so low that going going to these meets for 4 years or 6 years or training for 10 years, it's like it's just not going to happen. And so
hmm,
you end up in the spot where it's like that is already hard enough, but compounded by the fact that if you're the wrong weight class, you're just a little bit too short, a little bit too tall, or you know, you're just like a little behind someone else, like just zero chance.
hmm,
So it feels like it's kind of killed. This qualification system has completely killed the event, the actual meet itself.
hmm,
I've said this before many times. You look at like the Giulias from Italy,
hmm,
and if you looked at Giulia Imperio on paper in the future, 10 years from now, people will look back at her and be like, oh, she was kind of not that good. She bombed out a lot. She missed a lot of lifts. But
hmm,
she's a good lifter. She's just been put into these positions where it's like she's trying to make one total the whole
hmm,
time, just
hmm,
missing and missing. And the sad thing is like, you know, she doesn't have a chance to get to the Olympics. Her best ever total plus a little bit would have got her there. But that's
hmm,
just like you're asking something that maybe happens once every decade for somebody, right?
hmm.
And so you look at it, it's like her career looks like a bunch of bomb outs and a bunch of missed lifts.
Yeah.
And she's a good lifter that should be like in a place where she could be winning these meets, like winning Euros, winning whatever. And she has medaled in these things, but it's kind of sad because it's like it just kind of takes all that like the wind out of these sails of these people, right? You training for 10 years as a weightlifter and like your career is riddled with just a bunch of mislifts and bomb outs, it sucks.
Hmm. So how would you change the qualification system?
I think I would love to see. I think there needs to be another element. They had the Roby system, and Roby
Hmm.
points were insane. The benefit of Roby's was that it had the opposite effect. It really built up the meets because every meet you'd have Chinese national lifters showing up in San Diego or showing up in Sweden, and it's like this is cool. Like
Hmm.
this is awesome. You made everybody have to attend a bunch of meets, and that was really cool for the sport, for spectators, for fans. This system is the opposite. It's just like one giant total.
Hmm.
Like Lasha could have done one meet and
Yeah.
never touched barbell again.
Hmm.
That sucks. That would suck because like he's a great, element of the sport. So I think you have to have a balance. I think the system we have now would be okay if it had some element that like awarded a significant, like maybe there needs to be some average. So like
Hmm.
combination of several good meets is your score. So you have to perform well regularly, but not so dramatically weighted like Roby's was, where if you had one bad meet, you're out.
Hmm.
And then put a lot of bias on extra points or bigger scores for winning continental meets. If
Hmm.
you win Europeans, that should be worth a lot more.
Hmm.
Because what it would do is it would drive people to win those competitions and it would be more of a sport. It's not just 20 people showing up to make the biggest total they can, right? It's 20
Hmm.
people showing up to make a bigger total than everyone else and win a meet. And if you won netted points and there's some average, I think you'd have a better system because overall it would bolster the sport itself to be a little more exciting to watch. You know, winning a Worlds or a Euros would be a bigger deal. But right now it's kind of, no one, I mean, most people probably don't even know who wins Euros, but like it's just one of those things where it's kind of a bummer that like that's not a bigger deal, European champion or Pan Am champion, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I had a buddy who like he was joking, but he's like, "Hey, I'm just gonna run like a super heavy cycle, and then like go put up a huge total and qualify for the Olympics, right? At one of these competitions." But I mean, that's kind of how it works, right? Like you just need that one good day, and like if you do that, then you're in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality, right? It's like you look at so many of these scenarios, and it's like the Rizky's a great, probably the best example of it, right? I mean, he was
Hmm.
behind the whole time and did one good meet, and that was it.
Yeah,
Performed well, but like he passed Rotmont, right?
yeah. So would you then like at the Olympics allow for like multiple lifters from like the same country? Because
I
it's
don't think
it's it's interesting seeing like, like China that's like so deep uh is not sending a lot of their top lifters. So like how would you approach that?
I mean, I don't think you can. The problem with the Olympics is kind of the least exciting meet of the whole quad, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's extremely predictable. I
Hmm.
mean, I could probably rattle off who's going to win every class and be pretty right on. You
Hmm.
know, Maybe there's some one-off thing. I know last time Seb got everyone except Hidden Diaz, right? But that
Hmm.
was a total upset. And so you're kind of in a place where like that competition is not that exciting, and it's done that way because it just ends up they have to limit the number of spots. The IOC only
Hmm.
gives you so many spots. I don't think allowing I don't think allowing countries to send multiple athletes in the same class like we used to makes sense because you're going to end up with a lot of these classes being just stacked where they would
Hmm.
try to put two into the 73s or two into whatever. And it just isn't, it's not as interesting, to have, top two Chinese athletes winning, three weight classes or something.
Hmm.
Uh, it's it's kind of just a weird event. It's kind of stuck within the confines of whatever the rules the IOC gives us. So I think at the Olympics it'd be cooler though to see more classes. The
Hmm.
rumor we heard is that maybe they'll cut it down to 8 and then allow 5 spots
Hmm.
per male and female, which would be awesome because that would be the way we need to move is consolidating the talent and then adding more spots if possible.
Hmm.
We'll see though.
Interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the enhanced games? Have you
I
like looked into that at all?
Yeah, they asked me to do a podcast with them a few months back. I wasn't able to do it, but um, it'll be forgotten in 6 months. It's
Really?
nothing. Yeah, it's trash. I mean, it's like what it's gonna be is it's gonna be anyone who's been around the sports like this for long enough knows that like you're
Hmm.
not gonna get top athletes. The
Hmm.
people who go there are gonna do, you know, there's no amount of drugs that's gonna make a guy who's running, 10 10-5 run 9-8, right? Like
Hmm.
it's not happening. And we already know basically everybody at the Olympics is, there's some doping basically everywhere.
Hmm.
So it's like, I don't, I think the idea sounds interesting, but it's like, it already exists. It's called the Olympics. Like,
Yeah.
what it is. Like,
Yeah.
and there's more to it than just drugs. I mean, China, China is a monstrous country that is
Hmm.
trying to win. It's not just like, Li Wenhua is a guy who's doing drugs to win. It's like you have a nation and
Hmm.
all of the resources of a nation behind this. So it's like there's no way that like amateurs with a bunch of drugs are going to be able to beat these people. I mean, the people at the Olympics are the absolute pinnacle of talent.
Hmm.
Sure, there'll be some cool performances maybe, but I mean, there's just not going to be anything special. That's my guess. I could be totally wrong, but it's going to be a huge dud and kind of forgotten pretty quickly.
Yeah, but they're providing some incentives. I think they're like giving $1 million to the winner of uh what was it? It was like the 100-meter sprint and like some swimming event and like maybe
I mean,
weightlifting. Like the winner gets $1 million. Like that's a
if
pretty
you
large
know,
incentive.
you know what I would do if I was any number of Olympic A standard sprinters, I just go and win the money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't even need to be on drugs. You know you could beat everybody. If you're running
Hmm.
sub 10, like if you're running sub 10 the 100, like there's like everyone else is also running sub 10. There's just not that many people doing it, right? So like
Hmm.
you show up and yeah. Or it could be that the reality is like everyone's like, oh, there's a lot of money, like dirty or clean, the people who can win, right? So they just
Hmm.
show up and kick ass.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
It's
There's a
interesting.
speaking of prize money, there's a competition that's really interesting to me that I think could be something super cool. The Saudi Games
Hmm.
is a competition. They have a weightlifting event. It's like a Olympics, but for Saudi Arabia. And they have a weightlifting event that has three classes, men and women. And the winner receives 270,000 US dollars.
Hmm.
The the winner of the 71 kilo plus category in the women would have gotten smashed at AO1,
Really
like sub 200 total, like
interesting.
talking like maybe 180
Hmm.
at like super at like over 71. And then like there's girls that are doing just over body weight snatches winning quarter million US dollars.
Hmm.
I think it's obviously that's because women haven't participated in sports there for a long time. So the talent will come up, but I would love to see that kind of event where there's a ton of
Hmm.
money involved and there's like a wide open sort of berth for everyone to sort of jump in and see what they can do. That would be really cool to see. I'd love to see that kind of stuff like in the Middle East really take off because there's money there that's just like, you know, just means nothing to them. Like they could
Yeah.
throw around like whatever. Um, so yeah, it'd be
That's
cool.
Yeah, the Arnold used to have cash prizes for weightlifting, right?
Yeah, and it was like a Sinclair meet, and it was like maybe 3 grand or something. Maybe sometimes it was more, 5 grand or 10 grand. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love. Yeah,
we should bring that back.
I mean, money meets would be great. I would love to see. Personally, I would love to see. I think the sport would grow if you had a lot more. I don't know how to describe it. Like the national team in the U.S., they're never at any meets because they're all competing the whole time for the Olympics.
Right.
You don't really get that top tier talent. You have everybody below them, which are good. They're good athletes. They're great athletes. I'd love to see weightlifting or USAW at least devise a system to help facilitate participation via like a league style system with prize money and awards and
Mm,
stuff like that, where it's not just like 400 people at nationals show up and everyone just kind of is there to max out. I'd
mm,
love to see more of like a battle, like team events, league style, or you
hmm,
know the culmination of several events tied together equals a win, something like that, where you could get these people that are really good athletes and they would probably bring other people in because there's money to be had
mm,
because there's an interesting like story to follow and you can get behind a certain person. It's like right now, it's like I bet if you asked half the people at nationals who won the other weight classes,
mm,
wouldn't get all of them right. And guaranteed no one could tell you who got second in all the other weight classes,
mm, mm,
right? You had a league system where like, like in CrossFit, where you kind of find these big names and follow them. And there was an interesting like sort of story behind a lot of these people. I'd love to see that kind of system implemented in weightlifting for the people below that national team level.
Mm-hmm.
They could participate, they could be doing big lifts, they could do well. There's like a sort of career path because you can make money doing it. So there's incentive to stay in the sport. Because like right
Mm-hmm.
now, unless you're doing something else, like there's really just no significant reward, you know. You could win a
Mm-hmm.
medal, but like they probably, that probably isn't as satisfying as like feeling like you're a professional athlete in the sense that you're actually participating and winning and, getting some prizes.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I want you to talk a little bit about your experience working with Abajev. What was that like?
I mean, so I came to Abajev from my coach, Steve Goff,
Mm-hmm.
who was a huge like fan of the Bulgarian system. So the transition from what I did with Goff to what Abajev did was identical. It was the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
the actual training itself was always just, it's like the basic system is, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you train 2 or 3 times. You train for, it's like max front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, and then again in the evening, max snatch, clean and jerk, front squat. Maybe at night you do front squat and jerk or something. Um, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday was 4 exercises morning and night. It'd be max front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, then front squat again, and then the same thing at night. So you'd squat out of 42 exercises a week, you'd squat 18 times maybe, and then the
Mm-hmm.
rest all snatch, clean and jerk or power variations. Every session was maximum or basically maximum, within 5 to 10 kilos of your best,
Mm-hmm.
or as close as you could get to it. Um, zero volume work. There was
Mm-hmm.
no volume anywhere. But Abajev, like, I think there's this like mystique around it because you could almost call it like the Bulgarian era versus like the Bulgarian system. The system is just like, you know, it's just brute force. It's just like just
Mm-hmm.
push and push. Um, I think that I think that training with Abujayev was for me a couple things. I went there because I trained with him because I wanted answers. I wanted to know
Mm-hmm.
like what is it? Am I missing something? Because I had trained like that for 5 years before I met him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really strong. My legs were strong, but I wasn't like a great lifter. And I was always curious, like, is there something I'm missing? Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, why am I not lifting these bigger weights? And at some point, sitting in the garage with him, like he just told me, he's like, oh, like in very broken English, was like, you take one pill the first day, then three. And it's like, oh, okay. He's like, he literally said it's just all drugs. Like you just need
Mm-hmm.
the system doesn't work without drugs. I mean, those are literally his words. And it was like that was relief. It's like, oh, okay, cool, I get
Mm-hmm.
it. Okay. Like I'm not an idiot. I'm not like
Mm-hmm.
confused. Okay, it's just drugs. Um,
It's
and so,
also, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also one of those systems, like you said, where it
yeah,
selects for the athlete, right? It's not a system that's like that's maximizing an athlete's like response to training. It's saying, here's what we're doing. If you fall within the category of athletes that respond to this style of training, you're gonna be successful,
yeah,
right?
yeah, the best example I can give of that, the most is actually really funny. I don't know if you know who Jim Schmitz is, but Jim Schmitz is a,
For the name.
three-time Olympic coach, probably like the most
Oh,
accomplished coach.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
He's about 80 now. My um my wife asked him one time, she was like, this is probably about 2008. She's like, man, the Chinese are just like every one of their jerks is just perfect. They're
Hmm.
so good. It's like, how are they so good? How come the Chinese team, their jerks are so good? And the best response I've ever heard, he said, because the ones that couldn't do it perfectly aren't on the team. Makes you like, puts into perspective, like, oh yeah, like, you know, who would you rather pick as a coach? An athlete who's like pretty good snatch, a weak clean, but never misses jerks, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody who struggles in the snatch, isn't confident in the clean and presses out jerks. Like you're just that person is just not going to get to the same level as the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least from the perspective of like a national system where they only want people that are going to excel. They just need that to happen. And so you have that same thing, like you said, like in the Bulgarian system was the people that are going to benefit from a program that is snatch, clean, and jerk and front squat are going to do well in a system that's snatch, clean, and jerk and front squat.
Mm-hmm.
People that need more back strength or more general strength or shoulder strength or any of these things, like they're not going to do super well. They're gonna. That was me. I had a huge front. Like squatting was always super easy to me, but I couldn't pull for shit. My back was not super strong. My
Mm-hmm.
overhead wasn't great. But there was never going to be anything in that system that was going to address that.
Mm-hmm. What were your best lifts of all time?
My best lifts
Classical
were
lifts.
as like a heavy 85, I did 140, 170
Okay.
in the gym. So it wasn't like I wasn't very good, but I was not like I wasn't like terrible, but it just was, and those numbers were done with like a front squat in I think at that time I was front squatting 240.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it was like, I mean, front squatting and back squatting was like super easy, but
Mm-hmm.
racking, getting a 150 clean to my chest was way harder than standing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we never did any pulls or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, what do you attribute to the recent success that we've seen with like in the US with our lifters like starting to be very successful like on the international stage? What do you attribute that like kind of recent success to and like surge in like the US in our performance?
So I think it's a couple of things. Like, when I look at where we were 20 years ago, we had an athlete, I won't say who it was. We had an athlete we sent to international competitions that did split cleans.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to put that into perspective. Like, and that's not like 1950. We're talking like 2000s here.
Yeah.
So several factors. One, more talent, just
Mm-hmm.
way more talent on the women's side significantly.
Okay.
The men's side we're actually not as good as we have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Opinion. There's some talented people that are coming up, but we haven't quite surpassed what we had in like the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But on the women's side, we have just more talent coming in. But in general, weightlifting is more acceptable. You know, it's like a totally normal thing to do weightlifting. So that's like a huge draw there. The second is everybody as coaches got better. Like over the last 10 years, everybody is better than they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have as many questions about how to coach and how to train. Like I don't say solved is the wrong word, but we understand it so much better now.
Mm-hmm.
No one is asking questions that are, like sort of misguided or just like way off. Like we all pretty much can produce athletes, I feel like, at least the
Mm-hmm.
top 40% of coaches. Um, People that do it like really seriously professionally. And then on top of that, like you have a factor that I think is maybe underappreciated, but when you start to have success,
Mm-hmm.
it's you get success. So you have athletes go and medal, or athletes do well, or break a record, or start to win junior meets, and it starts to become this thing that like it becomes possible.
Mm-hmm.
Spoke one time to a very, very good lifter. He was an Olympian, and he told me a great story. And he was like, in my country, when we started training, nobody could clean and jerk 200 kilos. And
Mm-hmm.
even with drugs, everyone was taking drugs and we couldn't break 200. And no one in the country had ever done it. And then there was one guy, the first guy to do it, he broke the 200 mark. And then it was just like the floodgates opened and
Mm-hmm.
now that country is easily one of the best in the world. Um,
It's
and
like
so it's
the 4 minute mile, right? Like
totally,
after that guy hit it, it was what? There was a bunch of
yeah.
people that did it like immediately after. Yeah.
And it's like a lot of factors, but it's like sort of that thing like, oh shit, we could be good. And then
Mm-hmm.
like how many women now snatch 100 kilos? I mean, that's not
Mm-hmm.
like it's not uncommon, it's not super common, but like there's a lot of people, girls that snatch 100 kilos in a bunch of different weight classes. Like that's super, super strong.
Mm,
Um, and so you just have more of this going on. People see it as like, oh, Kate Vibert, medal of the Olympics, or Maddie Rogers, or
mm,
Al Meredith Alwine's a world champion. Like, shit, I guess it's like it's doable. You look at
mm.
Olivia Reeves now, and it's like Olivia Reeves will be Olympic champion,
Knock on
and
wood.
yeah, unless something insane happens, which it
Yeah.
could, but like she's gonna, she just makes three lifts, she'll win it.
Mm,
Uh, and so you have to imagine not just like what she's gonna do, but who is looking at her
mm,
and sees her and it's like, oh, that's cool. I could do that. She could be the greatest ambassador we've ever had for weightlifting.
yeah.
She's she's just like the girl next door. She's super sweet, she's super nice. She doesn't have, there's nothing about her that's like that's that's gonna sound terrible, but like there's nothing about her that's like a defining thing about her that sets her apart from, the typical 21-year-old girl,
Mm,
like she has like, a 22-inch neck or something and traps that, come out of her forehead or whatever. Like she just
mm,
looks like a regular athlete,
mm,
and that's something that a lot of people can see and relate to and be excited about. Um, it's like, oh, she's not like, yeah, she's, it's a very, it's a great possibility. I really hope that that turns into something. But like I said, like that's something that would draw way more people in and you're going to pull in more.
mm.
So it's that whole thing. Those three factors, I think, are what has driven the success recently in the women's side.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Max, I am about out of time here. I gotta hop off and jump on another call. But dude, thanks
Yeah,
so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
yeah, anytime. Thanks for
Uh
having
yeah. Also, about this, like, so about the coaching platform,
me. Yeah,
like I would be interested to
I'll
like know
send you a
some more
link.
details on that. Yeah.
I'll send you a link. You can try out the beta.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be dope. So
Yeah, just
awesome,
give us
man.
let us know what you like and don't like.
For sure. Well,
Cool, man.
I'll have this I just posted on YouTube, so I'll have it up probably on like Sunday, and then I can
Perfect.
just like tag you in it. So
Sounds good, man.
awesome. Again, hey, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Of course.
And enjoy your time over there.
Yeah, I will. Cool,
All right.
man.
See ya.
Take